This episode of Gators Breakdown is brought to you by UFM Underwear. Head to ufmunderwear.com and use promo code BREAKDOWN for $5 off your purchase. UFM Underwear. Support your manhood. The Gators Breakdown podcast is ready to go. I'm your host, David Waters, and you can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SCC. Well, we tried to tell everyone, to just wait before they piled on Florida last week for a 24-20 win. You hear that out there? A win over Miami last week. Rival fan bases, much of the media out there couldn't wait to pile on Florida for an ugly win. And could Florida have played better? Absolutely. But it was the first game of the season in a big spotlight. Some mistakes happened, yes. And then magnified because, it being Florida and the only game on TV, the only game people could watch out there. We had criticism of Felipe Franks, statements of Florida being overhyped. Well, as it turns out, there aren't many teams playing their best football the first game of the season. And so, look, you saw it first week around the country, especially in the SEC. We usually take a look around at what rivals in the SEC did in our reaction episode, but with Florida having a bye week, this episode, we'll take a look at, the struggles of rivals and division foes for the Gators. And now the shoe's on the other foot. Gator fans can have a little bit of fun out there just because of everything we took and had to deal with last week with rival fan bases and the media out there, just kind of just putting it all on Florida, just not living up to a certain expectation that they had set. And fair or unfair, we'll see how it turns out. But a lot of people were already putting some final thoughts on Florida after only one game, and I'm gonna try not to do that here on this episode. I'm trying not to overreact, but there's some big worries for some programs out there already after week one. So, try not to overreact, just like some people did out there last week. But, look, yes, Florida has to get better. Florida has to play better. But, just for like these other teams, it's not written in stone this season of how it will turn out. So, we'll see. But there is a lot to talk about with some rival teams out there, the SEC and its struggles. Especially in the SEC East, we'll get there. But, Florida wasn't the only team that was going to struggle. We knew that going into week one. Some quarterbacks out there struggled. Some other defenses out there struggled. Some teams didn't win the way they were supposed to. We'll get into some of that here on this episode of Gators Breakdown. Kind of limited schedule with the bye week, and one thing I definitely want to stress out there, Hurricane Dorian. I know I live in Jacksonville area, so we have a big eye on this, working at the TV station as well. I'll be in kind of hurricane coverage, hurricane mode the rest of this week. I was recording this episode about midday on Monday on Labor Day, but everybody heed the warnings. After telling you to evacuate. But just pay attention out there. I'm trying to PSA for a moment here. These things are serious. These hurricanes are serious. Don't get caught, not paying attention or trying to be brave, or just play it smart. Get out when you can. If they tell you to evacuate, please leave. But watch your local news. Keep an eye on it. A lot of unpredictability still with this storm. With about a day or two away from the Jacksonville area. But if you're in South Florida, it's right on your doorstep. So just be cognizant, be mindful, and everybody stay safe out there. Of course, we want to, be able to interact and listen and all that. And the only way, we don't know how serious this storm can get. So just pay attention out there. Gator stuff can wait. Other stuff can wait. Take care of yourself first. And you and your family out there first, and just pay attention. That's the biggest thing. And everybody be safe out there. So before we get into all what happened this first full week of college football, remember you can find Gators Breakdown on news4jax.com/Gators Breakdown. You'll find all the Gators Breakdown episodes as well as articles from the News4Jax sports team. Also catch the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. When using those services, please share, rate, and review the show. Follow us on social media, on Twitter and Facebook at Gators Breakdown. Also, you can go back, a News4Jax exclusive, Talking with Troop. Former Gators tight end Ben Troop joins me every week on News4Jax and gets his thoughts on the Gators like only he can. Ben brings it every time. The last one we recorded late last week, we got some thoughts of Ben from the Miami game and looking forward to the bye week and what the Gators can work on moving forward. And you can catch that every week exclusively on news4jax.com/Gators Breakdown. So let's get into it. And the game that was moved from Jacksonville because of Hurricane Dorian, and Florida State, Boise State. And the flow of that game started out very well for Florida State. And they were getting the ball to their athletes in space. James Blackman, wasn't necessarily asked to do a lot early on. Get the ball in the playmaker's hands. You had Cam Akers running crazy. Florida State's athletes were pretty much taking over early on in that game. Boise State was kind of, shoot themselves in the foot a little bit too, and giving FSU a lot of chances here. But you get to halftime, and it's a 31-19 halftime score. Florida State's feeling good, and then comes the second half. Hank Bachmeier, true freshman quarterback for Boise State, and that running game. You could tell early on that Boise State was still able to run the ball. They were just kind of killing themselves a little bit. Florida State was able to take advantage and put up some quick points. 21 points in the first quarter, but like I said, 31-19 halftime score, and then Boise State puts on a clinic in the second half. I mean, it was, it's tough. I don't know where Florida State goes from here after that second half. I mean, the whole game, the Boise State was 8 for 8 in the red zone. They had to settle for field goals early. So you mentioned, having to have to kick themselves, or hurt themselves a lot. Boise State, well, they had to settle for field goals. There were some turnovers in the first half. Florida State then had 2 fumbles in the third quarter on back-to-back drives. Both of them and Boise State's in the field. Florida State couldn't recover a fumble. That would have changed the game probably a little bit. They still couldn't do much in the second half. And Boise State, 57 rushing attempts, were the second most during head coach Brian Harson's tenure. That's since 2014. The Broncos ran for 214 yards. And they were just able to keep FSU's defense on the field. And like I said, even though FSU jumped out to a pretty big lead, they were scoring really, really quick. You could see Boise State were still putting drives together, even though with some turnovers, and Florida State's defense was just on the field way, way, way too much. Those 57 carries are just too shy of a mark for Boise State when they had 59 carries back in 2015. Boise State scored the final 23 points of the game, and the defense limited the Seminoles to just 99 rushing yards on 28 carries. And that was with some big runs, too, early, like I said, by Cam Akers. So only 99 rushing yards for the whole game when you had some big runs in there. And, Florida State, they just couldn't sustain what they had in the first half. They only had 68 yards of offense in the second half. Boise State made some adjustments. They were getting beat, as I mentioned, by the athletes of Florida State in the first half. But, and they were kind of playing off of FSU and, just giving FSU a little bit of room, and their athletes would just take over. They actually, brought coverage up, manned up against FSU. And besides, Tamorian Terry, the wide receiver for FSU, had a big screen run for a touchdown early in the first half. Cam Akers, that big run, as I mentioned, as well. But, Boise State really just kept, the big plays from happening in the second half, and you could just tell watching that game. It was for James Blackman and the passing game in the second half for FSU. It was either really short screen swing passes or bombs, 40, 50-yard, deep routes. There was nothing intermediate. It was like kind of feast or famine with that FSU offense. And, where do they go from here? I mean, last week they were all confident watching Florida and Miami play a 24-20 game that, they were already confident that they were going to be back and that they would beat these two teams. And, well, after 1 week and, some weird happenings because of the game being moved from Jacksonville to Tallahassee, but Boise State wasn't affected by that when it was all said and done. They flew into Jacksonville, had to drive all the way to Tallahassee. They had their fan base, a lot of their fan base in Doak Campbell. And, as far as crowds goes, I'm not going to fault many FSU fans for not, going to that game and selling that game out or anything. That was, last minute change, everything that had to go on with the hurricane, families, taking care of all that stuff, that's besides the fact. But Man, I mean, where does Willie Taggart go from here? This was a big game for them for FSU coming off of last year. You needed to write the message out there, write the narrative, and that narrative right now is Willie Taggart's in over his head. And it wasn't necessarily a big fan of the hiring there at FSU. Just hasn't proven enough as a head coach, and especially at big time schools. And now it's just even with Bravs coming in as offensive coordinator and off to a fast start where it looked different. I mean, it did look different in the first half. Don't get me wrong. I would still say FSU's a better team now than they were last year. But man, that's a game you cannot lose. And I don't like to label, in their first week inexcusable losses, or especially going into that game. Florida State, in the grand scheme of things, yes, they should beat Boise State 9 times out of 10. But with the way that program was trying to bounce back from last year, and what we know Boise State to be a hard out, a pretty good team, a pretty disciplined team, when it's all said and done, we knew this was going to be a tough game for Florida State. But a lot of people were still picking them to win this game, and Boise State having to travel all the way across the country and play in a pretty big game in some hot weather. That Florida State was going to be able to wear them down. It was the opposite. It was the exact opposite. You had FSU's defense on the field a lot. They could not get Boise State off the field. Boise State was converting third downs. They were able to run for chunk yardage from the get-go with their running game. That really surprised me. It's the way Boise State just kind of came in here and came into Tallahassee and just ran the ball down FSU's throat. And that's not really their style. They changed their style, and it worked. They handled the heat well. They kept FSU's defense on the field by running and getting chunk yardage. And I just don't know where FSU goes from here. I mean, this was a terrible loss, given as I mentioned, kind of going into the game. Not a terrible loss when you looked at it going into the game, because as I said, Boise State's a hard out. But once you got up the way Florida State did, the way you were up big at halftime. Maybe they got comfortable. I don't know. Maybe they felt good about themselves, and because of last year and everything's going good early. Man, they just completely fell apart. That's an inexcusable loss. The way you were up, the way you were playing, the way Boise State kind of couldn't get out their own way there. Man, and not only that, you had a true freshman quarterback in his first start come in here and basically play better than James Blackman in the second half, probably the whole game as well, besides just a couple big plays from Blackman. The FSU defense that is filled with athletes. You're up 31-19. That's a game you cannot lose. That's an inexcusable loss. The way the game played out. You're up big at halftime. You needed to keep your foot on their throat. You couldn't let up if you were Florida State, given what happened last year. They put so much into this game, so now I think you got to wonder where the mindset is. So you had this, kind of, we're turning around because we got Kendall Browse. The Gulf Coast offense is gone. Willie Taggart's going to take on more of a managerial role. It didn't work out. They were a little cleaner in the first half, as I said, hit some big plays. They looked a little, they probably looked more, cohesive, not necessarily bad penalties like we saw a lot last year, but they could not handle being on the field that long, and Boise State just coming here and kind of taking it on. So, for one fan base that was chirping a whole lot last week because of the way Florida and Miami played, well, you know what? This is the second year in a row now where you're, not trying to overreact here. They probably won't play. I say that, I didn't think they'd play as bad last year either, but. Probably not as bad as what they showed in the second half. But now, can you rally the troops? Can you get in that mental state of mind to bounce back? That's the big question, because I think they put a lot into this game. I know, talking around and looking around on Twitter and social media and message boards, that FSU really did put a lot into this game. This was a game to change the narrative, and now you're already 0-1. It was a big comeback by Boise State, and you didn't do anything in the second half. So, back to the drawing board, I think, for Willie Taggart, Kendall Browse, and the like there for Florida State. Moving on to probably one of the biggest upsets I can ever remember. This is another fan base that got a little cocky a little confident in because of what was going on with Florida and Miami. That's Tennessee. And wow, a 38-30 loss to Georgia State, and it wasn't even that close. Tennessee got a garbage time touchdown, and that was ugly. We were going into the season, and you had all these quarterback rankings of the SEC quarterbacks, and where was Felipe Franks in relation to a bunch of other schools or a bunch of other teams. And Jarrett Guarantano, I think that's the way he says you pronounce his name now, so we'll see. But, I mean, he was 26 of 40 for 311 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception, but in the second half, I mean, there was nothing he was doing to make me sit here and think he's better than Felipe Franks. But this way, you don't lose to Georgia State for one thing. In the second half of that game, Tennessee was up 17-14 going into halftime. That's about the time I started watching that game, flipping it over. Okay, it's a close game at halftime. Tennessee will rally the troops and get it together in the second half. Well, that didn't happen. Tennessee just got absolutely manhandled in the second half of that game for an SEC team. And for an SEC team that has recruited okay. To me, there's no blaming Butch Jones here. This is an inexcusable loss. This is an inexcusable loss all the way around. Talk about a mindset, as we were just talking about with FSU. I don't know what the mindset is here of Tennessee. I mean, you got absolutely bulldozed by a Georgia State team that won 2 games last year in the Sun Belt, was picked to finish dead last in the Sun Belt again, and it was just the run game here for Georgia State. It was quarterback Dan Ellington with his arm, 11 of 24 for 139 yards. That didn't slow down Georgia State, and him and running back Trey Barnett, who they combined for 156 yards, 2 touchdowns on 35 carries. I mean, it was unreal, and you could see him setting it up. And I tweeted right before it happened, and they were running the ball down Tennessee's throat. Even they were keying in on the running back. And I said, if there's a keeper here from Ellington, he's going to score. And there it was. 2 or 3 plays after that, there was a quarterback keeper. He makes a couple moves. He's off to the races, and Tennessee's got defensive players running into each other. And the upset was on. This game wasn't even as close as the 8-point win, Georgia State 38-30 there towards the end. I mean, this was inexcusable. You're an SEC team that has recruited okay. You're looking at getting better. You have a quarterback that's returning that had a lot of hype around him. You have Jim Chaney coming in from Georgia. I mean, Tennessee just couldn't do anything in the second half. Couldn't stay on the field on offense. Guarantano had some bad picks, bad turnovers. And Georgia State just methodically pounded the ball over and over again. And you end up with not even a close loss here to a Sun Belt team that, anything more, I don't know. It's just kind of, I can't get over how much more physical Georgia State was than Tennessee. And I mean, I understand, it's hard to get up for opponents like this, but you have that scare at halftime. It's a close game at halftime. You think you kind of rally the troops here and come back and put the game away, but it's just not what happened. And Tennessee's run game also wasn't doing over. I mean, penalties, turnovers, but now it's just Tennessee ran for 93 yards. I mean, when we talk about being physical and being out physical by Georgia State, it was on both sides of the ball. Now, it was Georgia State running the ball themselves in the second half that really put this game away, and Tennessee couldn't handle it. But still, I mean, you keep your offense on the field by running the ball against a team that's completely outmatched or should be outmatched, and it didn't happen. And, I mean, it's unreal how that game played out. I mean, you had Juwan Jennings making plays still, but it was, I mean, his last touchdown was a garbage time touchdown. I don't know what Tennessee does from here. It wasn't like, it wasn't a fluke win. I think that's the biggest thing here for Tennessee. It wasn't a fluke win by Georgia State. They just out-physical, manhandle Tennessee, and that's just something you don't expect to see a Sun Belt team do to an SEC team. So, as far as Jeremy Pruitt, it's early in the tenure there. They're not going to do anything, year two after that. A lot of people wanted to throw the comparisons of Will Muschamp with him, and you're under Saban, you're under that Saban tree, but you're a defensive coordinator, and I like the hire of Jim Chaney at offensive coordinator. I thought Jeremy Pruitt was actually a pretty good hire in and of itself there at Tennessee. Given some time, but this a 38-30 loss to Georgia State. Not supposed to happen, no matter the circumstance, no matter the bad recruiting from Butch Jones, no matter what you're changing at offensive coordinator, no matter the injuries on the offensive line. That's just a loss that's inexcusable. It can't happen. And, oof. I mean, you come out with power rankings for SEC teams now, and you absolutely have to put Tennessee last here just because of this loss here. So, I always look for teams, what they'll do, and try not to overreact here, how they'll bounce back. But they have BYU coming up next, does Tennessee, and they played Utah tough for a little while last Thursday night there. So it's going to be a tough opponent in and of itself for Tennessee to bounce back from. You start out 0-2. I mean, don't get me wrong. I don't think Tennessee's as bad as what they showed. They could be, but I don't. I try not to overreact here, and a lot of overreaction from first games. And do they play this bad all year? It remains to be seen. I don't think so. But here's the thing: you got BYU next. You lose that game, even if it's a close, hard-fought game. You start 0-2, and where's the psyche already of a Tennessee team that would start 0-2? I mean, you had Rocky Top, you had a boat burning down Saturday morning on the river beside the stadium. Fans not necessarily filling the stadium. That's another argument in and of itself. I was disappointed with crowds for South Carolina, North Carolina, and Tennessee. We'll probably see a lot of the same for Florida too, especially after this hurricane this week and playing a cupcake opponent. We'll see empty seats everywhere around college football. But I'm sure it was hard to get up for this game. But as I said, there's no explanation, no reasoning to lose 38-30. As I said, not even that close after a garbage time touchdown there for Georgia State to beat Tennessee the way they did. And then we know the next one. That was a big mess up in the SEC. As for South Carolina and Will Muschamp, we know that story all too well. But before we get into that game and what happened there, before we move on, guys, you've got to try UFM underwear. Guys, it's hot out there. Whether you're tailgating, working, you need a pair of UFM underwear. Underwear for Men is the only brand of men's underwear that offers both isolation and support, all while keeping you cool. Unlike other pouch underwear brands that have thin mesh panels or pre-sized pouches, Underwear for Men's patent pending design prevents skin-on-skin contact and eliminates chafing. Underwear for Men is a state of Florida company and has you covered no matter the activity. Everyday underwear, athletic underwear, work underwear, medical underwear. Underwear for Men is made for it all. Try your pair now. Head over to ufmunderwear.com and use promo code BREAKDOWN to get $5 off your purchase. UFM Underwear. Support your manhood. Yeah, and another fan base, I think, that felt confident after seeing Florida and Miami. I saw it a little bit. They were thinking they can maybe pull out a win here over Florida just by watching that game because of their tough schedule, and that's South Carolina. And I know this game against North Carolina up in Charlotte was a must-win given that difficulty of schedule for South Carolina coming up. Through 3 quarters of that game, South Carolina was up 20-9. They were in command of this game. Jake Bentley, quarterback for South Carolina. I mean, he was 14-21 when it was 20-9, 127 yards, 1 touchdown. Wasn't really making anything happen much, but at least taking care of the ball at that point. Then you had Sam Howell, former FSU commit, switched to North Carolina. And North Carolina was playing really safe with him, not taking a whole lot of chances there. But in the fourth quarter, you had a true freshman in Sam Howell outplay in every facet of the game what Jake Bentley was able to do. Jake Bentley, I'm telling you, and Gator fans, we know this better than anybody. Will Muschamp has not developed that quarterback from him being, this is his fourth year. Jake Bentley, he looks the same as a freshman as he did. He looks the same as a senior as he did as a freshman. And I was a little higher on Bentley, and he put up some good stats last year there. And how would that translate into his senior season? And we get game one, and and maybe this is an overreaction. I don't know. There's been no development of him hardly at all. And Sam Howell in the fourth quarter of this game, it just kind of surprised because he wasn't doing much, but a 98-yard drive and a 96-yard drive, connected on 5 consecutive passes at one point, and that averaged at 22 yards a pop there. His efficiency in the fourth quarter was 348.7. That was best for any FBS passer for a single quarter in week one. And then Jake Bentley, you look around and there's inexcusable interceptions, throws. I mean, don't get me wrong. A couple plays before he threw the final pick to seal the win for North Carolina, he overthrows a wide open receiver here to get a touchdown, and kind of, South Carolina goes on to take a lead. After that, they were down 24-20. Jake Bentley misses a receiver, and the rest is history. A couple plays later, he throws an interception that seals the game for North Carolina. I mean, Bentley missed 7 of his last 8 attempts, and it was. I don't get it. You have Brian Edwards, South Carolina's best offensive player in my mind. I was talking to a South Carolina buddy of mine. He's the one who brought this to my attention. And he, quote, said, Brian Edwards, our best player on offense, had 1 touch the whole game. And as Gator fans, we know exactly how that feels when Will Muschamp is your head coach, and he can't get out of his own way on offense. You have a playmaker on offense. You get him the ball. It didn't happen. This wasn't North Carolina shutting him down. This was just absolute ineptitude on offense between Will Muschamp and whatever he does with his offensive coordinator, offensive philosophy, and Jake Bentley just not being able to take that next step here. This was a game. South Carolina was up 20-9. You don't lose this game. Mac Brown. You don't get me wrong, he's an experienced head coach, but still trying to figure out things on a North Carolina team that wasn't very good last year, and they find a way to win this game. And it's another SEC East opponent that goes down here in a game they probably should have won, especially once you get in the game. Well, even coming into the game, South Carolina was picked to win this game, and then the way the game was playing out, you're going against Mac Brown. He's playing a true freshman quarterback. You're up 20-9. You can't lose this game. You cannot lose this game if you're Will Muschamp. So, and now it's coming. You had Bentley, who's making his 33rd career start, and there's been a lack of growth there, and we know it all too familiar. And now you're starting to see a lot of the narrative out there. People kind of going back to what Will Muschamp did at Florida and how there was no growth in the offense, and now how it's translating that same way to South Carolina. Yes, he's improving the talent level there. He's recruiting pretty well. He's getting some pretty good, at least defensive players going along that, and kind of some playmakers at running back as well. But the offensive line's still an issue. Quarterback's an issue, and it just it's an all too familiar place in what South Carolina is compared to what Florida was under Will Muschamp. So a lack of growth, a lack of getting better for South Carolina and Will Muschamp, that inexcusable loss, I think, especially once you get in that game and the way it played out. That's just a game you can not lose if you're Will Muschamp. And so, I mean, it is what it is. We're kind of we're kind of used to that under Will Muschamp, but that was another fan base that was kind of barking at Florida and the way Florida was looking, and when it was all said and done, not a pretty look for South Carolina and Will Muschamp. And then Missouri. I mean, I don't know why you're playing a game in Wyoming to begin with, but they go on and lose 37-31 to Wyoming, and not a good look for the SEC East here. Kelly Bryant comes in and throws for 423 yards, but that wasn't enough. Still not enough. And Missouri was up in this game, and then end up losing the game. Another inexcusable loss. An SEC team's not supposed to lose this game. I mean, they give up 120 rushing yards to Wyoming's quarterback Sean Chambers here. And, Bryant, as I mentioned, 31 of 48 for 423 yards, 2 touchdowns, but he threw a costly interception in the end zone and lost a fumble that was returned by Wyoming for another score. So, going into the season, and we were doing our Missouri previews and all that, my biggest thing was how does the offense cater to Kelly Bryant over Drew Lock? And like I said, he puts up good stats here. They were favored by more than 2 touchdowns, and the game, the way it began, Tigers scored on their first 2 possessions, and you thought kind of the route was on. You had 144-28 yard difference there in the first quarter, but turnovers really did Missouri in, and Missouri was kind of on the cusp here of maybe entering the rankings there. A lot of people kind of looking forward to what Kelly Bryant was going to do, especially with Larry Roundtree there at running back and Albert O at tight end. But you always worry about those Mountain West games. And especially those late kickoffs and your Mountain West games, you're traveling on the road, especially if you're an SEC team. That environment kind of maybe can lull you to sleep. But Missouri got off to a fast start. That wasn't necessarily the problem here. And eek, you lose this game. So in between South Carolina, Tennessee, Missouri, it was not a good look for the SEC East, and especially going back to this Missouri game. This was a team. A lot of people were talking about that sneaky team. They were trying to peg them as last year's Kentucky team that could kind of come from nowhere. Nobody's picking them to do much. And if there's one team that you're not picking in the East, that's not Georgia and it's not Florida, it's Missouri. Missouri's going to be that team. They're going to sneak up on some people because Kelly Bryant's coming in, and they go and lose to Wyoming there. So, and this is one team I probably think is a little bit better, even though they lose to Wyoming, a team that's probably a little bit better than what they showed here. As I said, it is a weird kind of road game to go play. But once again, once you get into the game and you're up by what they were and you're off to a fast start, and it's inexcusable at that point. Wyoming, as I said, they reversed their fortunes in the second quarter, outscored the Tigers 27-3 in a scoring spree that included a 30-yard fumble return by cornerback C.J. Colden, a 61-yard scoring run by Valladay there, a 75-yard touchdown run by Chambers, and the runs by Chambers and Valladay were the longest of their college careers. So Missouri really, really, shot themselves in the foot with some turnovers, but big plays as well. So, that Wyoming was, extending their lead at one point, 34-17, entering the fourth quarter there with a 1-yard touchdown run by Trey Smith. So, I just don't know what happens here. And you lose these games. And not only that, this one at one point, going into a 34-17 score in the fourth quarter there. Inexcusable. I don't know. I'm at a loss for words with some of these games and the way they played out, and just kind of look at everything with the hurricane and how it's coming, and trying to catch up with these games and all that. My head's going everywhere, but trying to put definitions or anything of why these games played out the way they did, of why Tennessee loses to Georgia State, and how South Carolina lets a true freshman quarterback go into Charlotte and the game they're up and controlling, and all of a sudden that game goes a different way, and Missouri losing this game. There's a lot of inexplicable losses here. So I don't know how you spin it. If you're a fan of those teams there, you have to really got to look. You really got to look at what you're facing coming up there, and try not to overreact to these losses here. But each in their own right were inexplicable, either going into the game or the way these games were playing out. So I don't know. It's just big time disappointment there with what some of the SEC East teams showed, especially Missouri and Wyoming and Tennessee losing to Georgia State here. Let's take a look around the SEC and a couple more games before I let go here on Gators Breakdown. Let's see. Going back, Kentucky, hard fought game with Toledo there. It was a close game going into the fourth quarter. Kentucky eventually breaks away. And not too much necessarily to take away from that. Kentucky's defense gave up 181 yards on the ground. So, Florida, when it's one of, that's Florida's next big opponent. Florida has their own run game kinks to work out too. I don't think this Kentucky defense is what they were last year after watching what they did against Toledo. Miami's defensive front probably a little bit better, I think, than what Kentucky brings to the table there. But, Florida still got its own little kinks to work out in the run game. Kind of get that figured out between UT Martin and Kentucky coming up soon as well. Memphis 15-10 over Ole Miss. Another bad loss for the SEC. Matt Corral does nothing whatsoever and only 93 yards passing. Gets shut down by Memphis. Rich Rod's offense there for Ole Miss. Not doing much right away there. So another disappointing loss there for the SEC as Memphis gets a 15-10 win over Ole Miss. Mississippi State 10-point win over Louisiana, 38-28. Defense, I guess, kind of you look at it and what they lost last year and going and transferring it to this year, giving up 28 points to Louisiana. Not a great start there. Stevens, the quarterback for Mississippi State, transferred from Penn State, ends up throwing for 236 yards. Alabama 42-3 win over Duke. Slow start, but when it's all said and done, Tua Tagovailoa throws for 336 yards. Jerry Jeudy had 137 of those. So let you know where the offense for Alabama still resides there in Tua and Jerry Jeudy. Arkansas only a 20-13 win over Portland State. Probably the game of the day. Auburn and Oregon, take a look at that big matchup. Bo Nix, kind of an ugly game until the fourth quarter there, but kind of before he finds a one-on-one coverage, throws it up, receiver gets it, and Auburn escapes with a victory over Oregon. A lot of people looking at that game because of Bo Nix playing as a true freshman and how he's getting lauded and kind of for some ugly play, but has one big play. And I know Gator fans are out there kind of comparing all these other quarterbacks and how they played and comparing it to Felipe Franks and how a lot of other quarterbacks are getting away with either their immaturity or their stats, and how it's not shared between the same criticism shared there. So Bo Nix lauded for his performance. I know he's a true freshman and all that, but Justin Herbert as well, only 242 yards against this Auburn defense, and he didn't necessarily he had some costly turnovers as well, and didn't necessarily put up great stats to come and beat Auburn there. So I do get the criticisms of media out there of not kind of sharing and being fair, and some of the same criticisms that you're throwing towards Felipe Franks and some of the other quarterbacks out there. LSU a 55-3 win over Georgia Southern. Joe Burrow 278 yards and 5 touchdowns there. They jumped on Georgia Southern early, 21-0 after the first quarter, and it was 21 more points in the second quarter there. So a 42-3 lead for LSU going into halftime. The game was never close whatsoever. There. And the last one we'll go over, Georgia Vanderbilt. Georgia jumped off. This game was kind of weird. Jake Fromm only 156 yards passing, but Georgia. I mean, as far as what they were able to do on the ground, a 30-6 win. Nothing to necessarily write home about, but they put it on Vandy, from the get-go as far as, rushing stats go. You had DeAndre Swift at 147 yards rushing, Brian Harrion 65 yards rushing, Zamir White 51 yards rushing there. So, you saw early on what Georgia was able to do, a lot of misdirection, really running the ball pretty heavy. Fromm was 15-23 for 156 yards and 1 touchdown. The first touchdown of the game, I believe, was a pass there. So, we'll see. Demetrius Robinson caught that 1 touchdown from Fromm. We'll see about Georgia. I think they got pretty comfortable there. It wasn't much of a game. If Vandy couldn't do anything on offense with Neal being named the starter, only 3.4 yards average passing for Neal. So Georgia just really salted the game away with their run game. Keyshawn Vaughn averaged about 5 yards a carry for Vanderbilt, 15 attempts for 74 yards. Long run of 16. So Georgia held him pretty well, but just they couldn't get the playmakers involved because Neal kind of very limited at quarterback there for Vanderbilt. But Georgia got up big. I think kind of coasted, kind of relaxed. There was a lack of focus there in the second half. Talking with some of my Georgia buddies as well. Not necessarily they weren't too impressed with what they saw with Georgia in the second half. There were a couple short yardage situations too where you would have expected Georgia's offensive line to kind of just bowl over Vanderbilt, but Vanderbilt was able to make some plays in short yardage situations. So 30-6 win for Georgia when it's all said and done. They got Notre Dame coming up in a couple weeks, so that's a big game there. And kind of we'll get more about what Georgia is there. I'm not taking too much away from this Vanderbilt game, positively or negatively for Georgia. I just think they got up, they got comfortable, kind of lost some focus, and kind of went away. Went away winning from there. Only 9 points for Georgia in the second half, but they were, as I said, up pretty comfortable. So that's it. That'll do it for just look around the rivals and what these teams were able to do. The rivals and the division foes for the Gators. A lot of chirping last week about how ugly Florida looked, but some subpar performances, some so-so performances out there from other teams, from other quarterbacks, and all the criticism thrown towards Florida's way in the last week. I think we'll calm down a little bit. Florida's got to get back on the field. Hopefully, against UT Martin, we'll see what this Hurricane Dorian does. But hopefully, Florida gets back on the field, puts some points up, and gets ready for Kentucky in a couple weeks. I'm the host of Gators Breakdown, David Waters. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. Guys and girls out there, thanks for listening to this episode of Gators Breakdown.